Welcome and thank you for joining us. We'll begin in about 1 minute as we allow folks to join us from the waiting room. If you just joined, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Cheryl Gomez with the study group and a managing editor of the Handbook series. We're really excited for this series exploring the handbook for assessment in the service of learning.
And hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Catuli with the study group. We're really grateful to have you all here today. Just a few logistics before we get started. As you settle in, please drop your name and where you're tuning in from in the chat. I also just dropped a link of resources that you can reference along the way or after the webinar. You can use the question and answer feature as we go through or drop any questions in the chat. And if you have any technical challenges as we move through the webinar, you can send me a message or an email at lauren@, study-group.org.
Thanks, Lauren. Today we'll provide a brief walkthrough of the handbook series and provide context on the focus of Volume 3, examples of assessment in the service of learning. We'll also provide a quick update and some set of work and move to the panel discussion with Volume 3 authors. This series really advances the Gordon Commission's call to transform assessment from a tool of measurement into a catalyst for learning, and it really works to reimagine assessment as integral to teaching and student growth and to build bridges between research, practice, and policy. You can now access our assessment for learning microsite. It should be in the chat as well, where each of the chapter is available to download and make it real simple to read and share individual chapters with your networks. We appreciate each of the series editors for their good and important work. This project has been a voluntary effort fueled by passion and sustained by a supported community of scholars. And we're really, really grateful for their nearly 90 contributors and set of teams whose insight and scholarship made this project possible. Next slide, please. Many of you are joining us today, and this set of work is remarkable. In terms of the Wonkathon slide, Professor Gordon, at 104 years old, proved that the power of wisdom and compassion is infinite. And his entry with Eric won the Wisest Wonk titles. And we really appreciate the 48 entries submitted for this year's Wonkathon and recommend checking out the work from our colleagues. And we appreciate the wider family of colleagues and team members who voted for our team. We invite you to sign up to receive our weekly roundup, highlighting the recent developments and initiative at the intersection of AI assessment, data, research, and policy. And lastly, we are actively publishing our Getting Smart series. If you have a topic or idea that you'd be interested in collaborating, we'd love to hear from you, so please do reach out.
Thank you, Cheryl. For decades, our friend, mentor, and co-editor, Professor Edmund W. Gordon, has challenged educators to rethink, to reimagine assessment, not merely as a tool for measuring learning, but as a means to foster and catalyze it. We're sharing a link to some of his recent remarks in the chat. You won't be sorry if you make time to listen to his remarks later today. We are delighted by the opportunity and excited to hear from panelists and a moderator joining us today for this conversation. And we'll get to hear from them in a moment. First, I am handing things off to Howard Everson, one of the editors for the Handbook for Assessment in the Service, Volume 3, alongside Professor Gordon, Eva Baker, and myself. Howard, we would love the chance to hear from you about the ambitions and the scope of Volume 3 before digging into 4 of its important chapters with our panelists today.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Howard Everson from the City University of New York. And I've had the honor and privilege of working with Eric and Cheryl and the other editors on this very ambitious work. I think we've been working on this project for about 3 years, actually. And so it's great to see it brought to fruition and now available to the educational community writ large. So our vision here with this particular volume, Volume 3, was to assemble a set of examples of assessment designs that would help the larger field of educational testing and assessment move from the theoretical, which the issues of theory and frameworks and the like are presented extensively through volumes 1 and 2, including a set of principles for the design of assessments in the service of learning. And so we would help to bring this movement and set a new direction for assessment in this particular volume, and in particular in Volume 3, we wanted to bring together a set of examples and practical work that our colleagues have been doing around the field. We assembled in Volume 3 some 13 separate chapters that range from variations of large-scale and classroom-based assessments and methods from AP Studio Art, AP Design, PBS programming, which you'll hear from Jeremy Roberts today about that work. Game-based assessments. You'll find a very good chapter on game-based assessments by Jack Buckley and Erica Snow. And then the work across the chapters, you'll hear from my colleague Jim Pellegrino on work done on the next generation science standards and how we've been working to design and develop assessments that can be used both in and out of the classroom. You'll hear as well this afternoon from Gurley Dela Cruz about badges, open badges for assessment. And then finally, we'll highlight in today's discussion issues of designing and developing assessments that move beyond large-scale sort of group-based assessments to personalizing assessments for learning and improving educational outcomes. So with that as the sort of the intro, is there a particular order, Eric, here of the presenters, or?
Yeah, I'll quarterback from here.
Okay, well.
So we'll ask, in terms of the sequence, we'll ask each of our panelists today to do 3 things. And there will be a copy of the recording shared with everyone here. Thanks for the question. The first is to share a personal example of assessment in the service of learning. And the intention there is to get to know our panelists a bit better, as well as to see how rich and varied assessment in the service of learning kind of is as a concept, and how deep and authentic the types of learning is. Second, each panelist will share some slides specific to their chapter. And third, time permitting, and we'll have about 8 minutes, 8 to 9 minutes for each of the panelists. There's, some kind of follow-up questions that we'll tee up to each of the panelists. So to start as an example, I'll share assessment in the service of learning in my own life. whole game learning that my daughter, Claire, a 7-year-old, is engaging in with softball. As a softball player, she early on struggled with the purpose of catching drills and batting drills and the kind of the running and all of the activities that happened during the week during practices. But as she got to experience the joy and the fun of Friday evening and Monday evening games, the various drills and developmental opportunities at practices during the week had meaning and purpose as they faced out of town teams, kind of in the weekly game. So the whole game as a performance task that drives learning throughout the week. So with that as my personal example, I'll hand things to our colleague, Gurley Dela Cruz.
Thank you, Eric, and hello all. Thanks. I'm very excited to be on this panel. And Eric, when you had posed that question to me, of course, I think the first thing that came to my mind are also really well-designed games. There are two that I'm playing right now, Once Human and Dismantle. And I'm always paying attention when I'm playing these games to how good games teach you. And with these two particular games in particular, specifically, watching how the game mechanics, how the level progression, the tutorials, and the hints, they're rolling out just at that right time. And in my mind, a well-designed game is really basically assessment in the service of learning. So it's gathering that data, it's responding to what you do, and it's helping you get better, and I'm hooked, right? So it was an easy reflection because that was the first thing that came to my mind. I left, and when I worked at UCLA for many years, and with a lot of folks on the panel and some of you in the audience, and I did a lot of game-based work there. I left in 2016 and started working with my co-author for the chapter, Connie Yao. And the examples that I'll be sharing with you all today, they come from the work that I did with her and our LRNG team. LRNG was the nonprofit that Connie spun out of her work with the MacArthur Foundation and the digital media learning work. And what I brought to the table was my model-based assessment lens. I brought that into the space, and hopefully you'll be able to see that influence in some of the examples that I'm going to be talking about. Next slide, please. Thanks. So let's start with where badges come from. Badges have always been about breaking bigger skills into smaller concrete pieces. I think we can all think about old Boy Scout merit badges. That was really one of those earlier examples of being where learners were asked to show what you can do, not just answer test questions. And what digital badges did was it takes that same idea and it scales it, right? So instead of a bunch of patches sitting on a sash, what you do is you get a digital credential that really makes that learning visible. It captures what someone did, why it matters, and the evidence behind it. And the open badge standard, that was designed so that really every badge included a mini assessment argument, right? It included the task, the criteria that was used, and the actual artifact-based evidence behind it. So in this way, digital badges make that learning transparent and transferable across contexts, and was a mechanism for us to be able to recognize real-world competencies. With LRNG, that was our effort to build a real learning ecosystem across the city. What we were doing there was we were connecting schools, community partners, employers, libraries, museums through badge pathways. And we were using playlists, which were a collection of learning experiences, to tie together online and in-person learning. And our LRNG badges, they were actually grounded in the norms of the organizations who were issuing them. And because the metadata and evidence were transparent and baked into those badges, organizations could use that information to decide whether they wanted to endorse the badges themselves, or in some of them would actually reissue the same badges. And in that way, credibility behind the badges actually came from the community and began to open doors to education and employment. Next slide. Or the slide. Go back to the GAP one. So one example comes from the work that we did with Gap Inc., the Gap Inc. stores, and the This Way Ahead program. And we were doing this alongside some of our community partners, and we were working with young people in Chicago who wanted to apply for a job with one of the Gap Inc. stores. So we focused on 3 core competencies: teamwork, conflict resolution, and punctuality. Not surprising, things that were really important for being successful in a retail store. Each of those badges were coupled with a learning experience. But what we did was we started with the badge first to really support that backwards design process. For instance, with conflict resolution, we worked with Gap to figure out, how did conflict resolution show up in the retail setting? And we used that to develop those competencies and identify what we needed to see to actually feel comfortable that the learners would be successful on the job. We had also learned from the hiring managers that one of the things that really factored into how their hiring decisions was how applicants would speak about their experiences during the interview. So one of the tasks that we designed was to structure a reflection task for them to be able to identify those examples in their everyday lives and have them actually practice it. And so what they submitted to us were audio files or video files of them practicing their responses to sample questions. So a little bit like a mock interview, and we would give them feedback. And the learners reported back to us that they felt that practice helped them feel comfortable and more confident when they walked into those interviews, and many of them actually got the jobs. And the Gap badges, all of the artifacts that the learners had submitted as part of the learning experiences, they were embedded in the badges, so the hiring managers could use that to inspect what the learners did to prepare for the interview. So that created this clean, verifiable evidence chain between what the learners did and what employers could inspect. Next slide. Another example was our Badges to Credit partnership, and this was among LRNG, the One Summer Chicago program, and Southern New Hampshire University, or SNU. So the question there was really, can informal learning count for college credit? So SNU used Lumina's global learning qualification, the global learning qualifications framework to evaluate our playlists and the associated rubrics, learner work, and they ultimately mapped 36 badges to 19 course equivalents. And when the learners completed the required badges, SNU automatically issued a meta badge that verified the competency for credit. And again, because the LRNG badges were developed using that model-based framework, the badges had that self-contained assessment argument. It had all the information that the SNU team needed to be able to inspect the artifacts, the different rubric scores, and even the badge issuers to determine whether to verify that the competency warranted awarding college credit. And in this way, it opened up a pathway where work from after-school programs, summer jobs, and community programs actually counted for college credit. Next slide. So where are we today? The story of open badges is still mixed. I mean, we've seen real progress. Some of you know we've had millions of badges that have been issued. Micro-credentials are being built into degree pathways. And we now have these really strong technical foundations with the Open Badge 3.0 standards, the comprehensive learning records, and the broader learning and employment record ecosystem. Altogether, they give us this a secure, verifiable, and actually a learner-controlled way to recognize skills that traditional transcripts were not built to show. But the promise isn't fully here yet, right? So as adoption is uneven, some of the metadata is underused, and pathways don't always translate into real opportunity. And we know employers do keep saying that they care about skills. And while the interoperable infrastructure is there, the systems around it are still catching up. So the big question is, can AI help, right? Everyone's always asking about that. And we can see that with large language models, like large LLM-powered systems, it's making some of the performance-based assessment processes more scalable. It's allowing us to deliver real-time, personalized feedback. We're able to analyze student work processes more easily, and we're able to adapt tasks on the fly. A lot of these things used to be labor intensive or require specialized programming skills to implement at scale. At Northeastern and at George Washington University, we're leveraging AI to pull skills out of syllabi, job descriptions, resumes, and align them to skills frameworks, which will help with some of the portability. But I guess, the open question still is whether or not AI can help badges actually finally work the way they were intended, or if badges will remain a prototype for what comes next.
So we have about 45 seconds for a question. Given where you started with richly designed, well-designed epistemic games, we're in this and where you ended with career-connected learning. We're in this moment where AI certainly seems to be amplifying human potential, where when you integrate it into real-world projects that demand communication and collaborative problem solving and critical thinking, that human teams plus AI can do more. At the same time, Blue Book sales are up at least 300%, in the last 6 months. I wonder how your experience with badging approaches informs your thinking about how we kind of assess learners as they're getting ready for the world of work.
That's a great question. Eric, as I see the spike in Blue Book sales coming from a trust issue, right? Of course, when our faculty aren't feeling comfortable that the students are doing the work themselves, they retreat to that format, right? That AI can't touch. Handwriting in the room, no devices, totally understandable. But I'm hoping that rather than operating from fear, what we do is we really look at this as a time for rethinking assessment, right? Like as I was, my examples and my work in badging and just my history with assessment design has shown meaningful assessments really come from work that looks like real work that emphasizes process, right? And in those ways, you'll get evidence that is harder to fake and actually ends up being more meaningful. And there are tools out there right now that are doing a lot of that are starting to step into that work. And I think about the work that's being done with Kristen's group with Kamigo and the conversation-based assessments as being one. Of course, Alina's work with Duolingo and multimodal assessment comes to my mind. And Sim Insights and Rajesh's work with using AI-driven scenario-based simulations, where they did some work with our faculty at Northeastern, and it's making it really easy for faculty to author rich simulations using just prompts rather than coding, which we had to do, and it would take a really long time to produce a scenario. And then because the standards now allow us to ingest all types of evidence, that work doesn't vanish right after it grades. We can actually report that and they can carry it with them. So I don't know, I'm hoping, I've got my fingers crossed that AI is going to actually help us move forward.
Thank you so much. Jer, we'd love to ask you to share a bit about a learning experience you've had that included an assessment in the service of learning or a great example, and about your work at PBS Kids.
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy Roberts. Great to be here today. Okay, I'm going to stay really on brand here, and I'm going to say Elden Ring is a video game. It's huge, wide open, can explore all over, and there's all sorts of creatures and places that represent all sorts of different types of challenges. And you can over and over go up against a challenge that it seems impossible at first, but as you learn more about the systems of the game, as you learn more and more about the nature of the challenge in front of you, and then all the things that you might be able to prepare in advance, or all the different kinds of tools that you can use and how you can apply them, and the confluence of all these things makes it very systematic, very fair for you to become better and better and better and better over time. And what you find Well, what I have found is after 1,000+ hours in this game is that I just roam around trying to perfect my approaches to all these really interesting and nuanced challenges. Really motivated me the nature of the challenge, the depth of the challenges, the breadth of the challenges. So I would say that's a great example. Okay, I would love to share today with you about assessment in the service of learning at PBS Kids. Next slide, please. I'll cover a few examples today. Individualization in a game, assessing skills using games, and optimizing impact in games using A/B testing and causal inference. Along the way, I'll point out some challenges we encountered, and I'll leave a little time at the end for some thoughts on implications. So here we go. Next slide, please. Yes, individualization. PBS Kids wanted to explore adjusting a game's difficulty in real time to each individual player's skill level. So the team commissioned Ruff Ruffman's Fish Force, produced and developed by GBH Boston. The game has 256 levels and uses a Bayesian item response theory approach to estimate the difficulty of each of its challenges and also estimate each player's skill level as they produce evidence as they play the game and tackle these challenges. It uses these estimates to matchmake between game difficulty and player skill level by choosing each next game challenge, such that the players are estimated to have about a 70% chance of success, trying to keep them in that sweet spot, that Vygotsky zone of proximal development. And research conducted by UCLA Crest showed that this version of Fish Force helped kids learn, but not more than a competing version that had a human-designed fixed sequence of levels. So it worked, but it didn't beat out the less expensive status quo approach. The verdict for us was that, yay, we can wield assessment to tailor media interventions to meet the needs of individuals, and that we concluded there's definitely potential for this approach, but it might be more effectively applied at the game library level. Think recommendation engine across a whole library. PBS Kids has 300+ games, mainly because we'd have to apply it at the library level once versus to each of the dozens of games that PBS Kids launches every year. Next slide, please. Next, PBS Kids wanted to assess the larger PBS Kids audience on a set of related skills. Curious George, everyone's favorite monkey, had a suite of 16 games focused on counting and cardinality, also created by GBH Boston. And UCLA Crest developed game-based indicators for a subset of these games. I think there were 7, and trained neural networks to predict outcomes on the team of 3, the test for early mathematics ability, which is a standardized assessment. And the best performing model leveraged many, many indicators across 7 of the games, and on average predicted team of 3 scores within about 8% of the actual score received by the participant on the team of 3. So we concluded that PBS Kids could assess this very hard to assess audience, do it in naturalistic settings, and do it pretty well for these learning goals. And over time, through other examples, we also gained confidence in assessing skills in science, social emotional learning, literacy, and more. So the verdict there for us was we can assess skills at scale using games and potentially develop some kind of barometer, maybe, of sorts, of early childhood skills in the US. Next slide, please. Optimizing impact at scale. Yes, next, we focused on how we might become able to optimize the impact that our media was producing, which required us to develop assessment approaches that would allow us to measure learning over time in games, which succeeded via some very innovative mixed method approaches out of UCLA Crest. Again, combining qualitative ratings and learning analytics. It's described in the chapter if you'd like to know more, but there were a few challenges along the way with some of the early approaches. The eligibility criteria only allowed us to apply the model to about 10% of all the players playing the game because of the naturalistic play patterns that we see in our audience. So then we developed capabilities for experimentation and causal inference. The idea was to become able to optimize game design decisions, lead to greater impact. We developed A/B testing infrastructure. We launched it in the PBS Kids Games app, and we started conducting experiments across games, series, age groups. some experiments are summarized in the chapter. For example, we were able to optimize instructions provided in game on their media modality and their specificity, how specific they were, and the way they were formulated, whether they were a question or not, things like that. The result was that kids needed fewer attempts to solve game challenges. And so the verdict for us was we can measure impact. We can measure learning over time. We can infer causality and optimize our design choices towards continuous improvement. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, challenges. Thank you. So these strategies for assessment in the service of learning required game development, game distribution, and game learning research. And PBS Kids was a great context in which to pioneer this. It had development, distribution, and the missions totally compatible with adding the play data, the gameplay data research component, and we made a lot of progress. But I'd like to zoom out, just make some observations about openness. First of all, the PBS Kids games are produced by a relatively small group of game developers, almost exclusively in association with PBS Kids TV shows. Only games produced by these projects are considered for distribution. The PBS Kids learning frameworks are not publicly available. The PBS Kids production processes that lead to such amazing games are not public. The research data is not made public. So PBS Kids is not an open media or open research enterprise. These gates are kept, in my view, due to their fight for competitive survival in an extremely tough media landscape. This means PBS Kids is not as conducive to the discovery and dissemination of knowledge about how kids learn from games as it could be. So a few observations about funding. The PBS Kids budget is controlled by the PBS membership. It's TV stations. They're more focused on video, less on games, more focused on an older audience, less on younger learners. And in my opinion, they're not focused on measuring learning as a part of impact. They're more focused on measuring and optimizing reach and engagement, which in the context of learning is necessary, but not sufficient. And when we needed funding for this kind of work, we had to seek it elsewhere, typically from federal and or philanthropic sources, which worked for a while until it didn't. The federal funding that powered the work I'm describing here, part of Education Department's Ready to Learn grant, was abruptly terminated mid-project earlier this year. Even bigger, the federal funding for PBS itself was eliminated. So suffice it to say, these funding sources were fragile against changing administration priorities, fragile against a compliant Congress. And I believe PBS Kids learning analytics and learning engineering activities have been substantially reduced due to these cuts, and that PBS itself does not have the capacity currently to fund these efforts internally. So I believe a new open public media organization may be warranted, one that focuses on games for learning and the data and research needed to show how kids learn from games and how best to use media to help them do that at scale. And finally, one where the funding is not as fragile. There's been some really interesting work on this line of thinking coming out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison lately. Over the last decade, they've been slowly building these key pieces. And if you want to learn more, I would plug Field Day Learning Games at fielddaylearninggames.org. Next slide. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And Jer, in about 45 seconds that we have, is there anything you might share about the design and development efforts at UW?
Yeah, you bet. Over the last 10 years, the Field Day Lab at University of Wisconsin-Madison has built a game development studio, a game distribution product called The Vault, which is publicly available and also available in Wisconsin classrooms. And they built the foundations of the game-based learning research infrastructure. I think the challenge they have now is threefold. Bringing those pieces together into an internally consistent organization. What does that look like? They're looking at various governance structures, not-for-profit, cooperative, et cetera. How would resources for starting something like this up be obtained? They're looking at grants and awards to get off the ground initially, but they're also very focused on sustainability. So what would long-term sustainability look like? And the vision there is a membership organization where each of the members either provide or consume the various services that the organization offers. You could imagine grad students using data from other games because they can't make a game. Game studios getting their game distributed and making it really easy to get the gameplay data, but they can't do the research. And parties interested in getting games created on a particular curriculum subject, engaging the game development studio, and so on. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there, I think. And if you're interested in getting involved, definitely check out fielddaylearninggames.org.
Thank you so much. One point of personal privilege, I noticed in the chat that we're honored to have Eva Baker from UCLA Crest here. And it's not a mistake. It's not incidental that each of the first 3 chapters that we'll be discussing here explicitly link their connection to the decades of important work at Crest. And so, Sunil, I'll hand things over to you, but just note that we're delighted to have our 4th co-editor and an inspiration for a lot of the work of this handbook, Eva Baker, here with us.
Yeah, it's you want me to start? Hey, I'm Sunil Kundaria, and had the privilege of being a contributor with several co-authors who were not only my co-authors, but were instrumental in developing what I'm about to tell you about. And with Eva here, it's we wouldn't be doing this work without her. All of what we started at Age of Learning to develop our personalized mastery learning system was because of a Crest conference in 2014 that really inspired us. So thank you, Eva, for everything and getting us to this point. It's coming full circle. So just to jump into things, next slide. So, we started with a problem definition, and when we started looking at things back over 10 years ago, when we started building the system I'm going to talk to you about. And you'll look at NAEP, which is fantastic for system measurement in terms of telling us that we're not doing a good job in terms of our children. So you look at children from not low-income families, 46% achieve a proficiency. And then you look at our low-income families, and we're at 19%. You look at students with IEPs, it's 10%. And then similar for English language learners. And you would think, all right, these are 4th grade proficiency levels. So, hey, sure, we know this and we're going to improve. But that's not the case. You look at 8th grade proficiency, and it actually goes down from 4th grade. So using assessment in the service of learning is something that is clearly needed and will be beneficial. That's what I'm hoping to present. And you look at the next slide, it's basically telling you that, look, our country is composed of low-income children. So we majority low-income kids across the system. In 2000, around 2000, there's about 4 states with over 50% of the population that was low income. Now we're looking at 22 states. So the stakes are super high in terms of doing this work right and moving the needle. All right, I'll move to the solution. Next slide. So what was our response and how do we think about it? So, building off of the great work and research that was already out there, we went out and decided, look, we have to look at how to really address equity issues. We wanted to design a system that personalized instruction for every child based on what they knew. And we started with a knowledge map that really linked together a scope and sequence in both math and reading, because we were really looking to address the 4th grade proficiency levels in those 2 core subjects. And really understanding those relationships. And then we used assessment throughout, starting with prior knowledge. So what does a child know? So they enter, as Jared was talking about, in their zone of proximal development. So what does a child know coming into a learning experience, and how can we use assessment for placement? Quick, easy assessments that within 15 to 20 minutes, being able to approximately place a child with what they're ready to learn next. Then all of our learning activities were designed to assess mastery. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but based on Bob Mislevy's work around evidence-centered design, we designed games based on them being assessments, so that not only could we could assess mastery, but we could also provide just-in-time feedback and scaffolding, while our data in the back end was collecting how a student actually performed, so they would see the activity again if they needed additional scaffolding. So can we move on? Thank you. So, talking about, and it was the great thing about this process and writing this chapter is that we were able to look at the principles put forward in the first and second chapter, or first and second handbook, and really look at how they applied and how closely they were aligned to the work we had been doing, and everything from our knowledge map to personalization engine really works to not only to address some of the equity issues with what is needed in terms of personalized learning, but also to create an environment that was much more engaging and motivational for each child, and then bringing in educators and caregivers to ensure that the data that our system was generating could be used to transfer knowledge from inside our game-based learning experiences to teachers and parents. Next slide, please. All right, let's see if we can make this work. As I mentioned, everything was evidence. We started with a really sound foundation in terms of creating something that was evidence-centered design. We offered a lot of agency in terms of activities to be chosen. So the way the knowledge map worked is that you could have different topics, for example, in math or reading, and those topics would have different endpoints. So we'd look across topics and ensure that there was still a lot of choice given to the student, because agency was really clearly important. Our system, which I'm going to show you now, was built with scaffolding. So there was dynamic support based on what a child needed. So we would have, if they didn't make any errors and they just mastered, they were ready to move forward to what was next, and they're ready to learn next. They weren't. As I mentioned, we would be collecting the data and knowing, but helping them through this process, and based on their prior knowledge, offer them strategies so they could get through and successfully complete this activity. Like I said, it's all real-time dynamic feedback loops within this. So let's see if we can make the video work. You want to give it a try, Cheryl?
Bees are having a parade. Count forward from 21 to put the Shapies on the float.
21. 22.
29. That's not the next number. What number comes after
22. 26.
Uh-oh. Try counting forward from 21 to find what number comes next.
21. 22.
You can see the scaffolds are right there, helping the child.
28.
Maybe sat down.
That's not the next number. Let's look at the number pattern. When we start counting from 1, we count
1, 2, 3.
So when we count from 21, we count
21. 22.
What number comes after
22. 30.
Let's look at the number pattern again. When we start counting from 1, we count
1, 2, 3.
So when we count from 21, we count
21. 22. 23. 23.
And that would have continued till they got the end. So the child would leave the experience with the right answers, and knowing that in the background we knew that they hadn't mastered this skill. We would have we would have this come back up later on until they were able to master it. And that was something that we did throughout nearly 200 games that would take a child from pre-K level, no knowledge of math or reading, to being able to be fluent at the end of a second or third grade level. So applying this, what you saw in this game, what's really important is, like, did it work, right? And so if you go to the next slide, please. And the great news is that it did. And we've extensively studied both our math, My Reading Academy, and the math program is My Math Academy, across over 100,000 students in 30 SL line studies. And what we found was significant learning gains, across the board in both literacy and math. We tested with many diverse populations, so Title I schools, urban, rural, multilingual learners, students with IEPs, and we've seen really positive results, meaningful gains across all of those populations. Teachers felt empowered not only with the data, but with the fact that their kids were really motivated to learn. 9 out of teachers across our studies reported that the program engaged their children or their students in learning, increased student self-confidence, enjoyment, and really importantly, because this was a clear part of our intentionality in terms of design, was the playing this is like, and talking about games, you want to feel like the game that you're an expert, and the kids doing this left these games feeling like they were readers and mathematicians, which from an affect perspective was what we wanted to achieve, and we're really happy to see that. Final slide, please. I was really, motivated by Dr. Gordon's quote here. What assessment offered us was definitely an opportunity to imagine what was possible, how we could change outcomes for everyone. And I think the problem that we introduced, I think that's really our mandate across all the work that we do is, how do you stake things like stagnant NAEP scores, and really use assessment not to measure what we're not doing, but to use it to create the future we want for all of our children. And then secondly, we have so much opportunity. Gurley, you talked about it, in terms of AI as an engine for equity, what we can do with natural language processing, what we can do with voice-based interfaces for non-readers in terms of comprehension. We really have this opportunity to lean into assessments and really make a difference in terms of learning. So yeah, that's what I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. So much to discuss there. And if we have time towards the top of the hour, I'll circle around with some follow-up questions. But want to now hand things over to Jim Pellegrino to talk about next generation science standards, the challenges and illustrations of designing assessments that serve learning.
You have to unmute. Thanks, Eric. Do you want me to give my personal example to begin with?
That would be great.
Okay. This is very different from what I'm going to be talking about here. It goes back about 47 years to when my son was 7 years old and in elementary school. And the teacher gave him a worksheet in school that had his basic addition facts on one side and his basic subtraction facts on the other. And he had to give the answers to those. He brought the sheet home, and on it, it said, Christopher knows his addition facts, but he needs to memorize his subtraction facts, because basically he got almost every one of them wrong, except for a few. I looked at his subtraction data and I said, aha, all of his answers that are wrong are off by one. So I sat Christopher down and did a little cognitive lab with him. Christopher, tell me, what is 8 take away 3? He went, 8, 7, 6. Christopher, what is 6 take away 4? 6, 5, 4, 3. It told me a lot. First of all, yes, he didn't know his subtraction facts, but that wasn't the point. He told me he knew what subtraction was conceptually. He was using an efficient countdown algorithm. He just had a bug in his procedure. I sat him down, I debugged him, I had him practice it. He went away happy, and I knew that eventually he'd memorize his subtraction facts. I'm happy to tell you he's 54 years old now, and he knows his subtraction facts. But that demonstrated me the power. Now I have to say, the teacher has 30 kids. Maybe she doesn't know about the developmental trajectory of kids developing knowledge and of subtraction and addition. I did as a cognitive psychologist. I knew that, so I could do the diagnosis. And from then on, he was no longer, crippled by the fact that he had to try to cram these facts into his head, because I knew essentially he'd be on the path to learning them and memorizing them. So that's a very personal example. It is consistent with the larger theme of when we bring together knowledge from research and knowledge from the domain and knowledge from assessment, we can actually create conditions where the results of assessment can be used productively to actually promote learning. Now, what I'm going to talk about is something very different. I'm going to talk about here. Let me get out of. I want to minimize this. Well, I can't do that. Let me go back. Howard is my co-conspirator on this. So anything you don't like, you can blame him. What concerns motivated this work? Well, first of all, I think many of you know that in 2012 and 2013, we developed new standards for science, contemporary K-12 science frameworks and standards that are represented in the framework for K-12 science education from the NRC and then the Next Generation Science Standards have a very different perspective on what it means to know and be proficient in science. It talks about 3 domains: the disciplinary core ideas, science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. But then it also says that knowledge and proficiency is not memorization of each of the 3 things separately, but the ability to integrate them in terms of performances that demonstrate you understand the conceptual knowledge or the core ideas, and you can use them in the service of solving problems, answering questions, designing solutions, etc. And that is essentially the idea of knowledge in use. The challenge then that was written into both the framework and the NGSS is that you now have to deal with classroom instruction that needs to be aligned with that vision. And that's a very different vision of what instruction and the classroom looks like in terms of the activities that teachers and students are going to be engaging with. In fact, in 2015, the NRC published a volume on the Guide to Implementing the Next Generation Science Standards, which was very much focused on what is it going to take to move towards this vision. In addition, one part of that was the fact that what we need is valid and instructionally supportive 3-dimensional assessments for learning. In fact, when we wrote the Developing Assessments report for NRC, we said this is going to be a very difficult challenge to do this because we've never had science assessments that look like this. And we really need them in the classroom because it's in the classroom where teachers and students need help to figure out what are the proficiencies that are required and how are we going to be able to monitor their progress towards attaining these. So the 2 projects that are described in our chapter are really 2 major design projects aligned with trying to fulfill the needs with respect to assessment that can be used to support learning. The first one we call the Next Generation Science Assessment Project. It was supported by NSF, Moore, and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And the second one has a strange name. I just call it SIPS. And it was supported by the U.S. Department of Education. The thing about both projects is they were multi-year, multi-institution collaboratives. In order to do this work, you need multiple forms of expertise. That includes the expertise of classroom educators, but you need measurement folks, you need curriculum folks, you need assessment folks, and each of these projects involved all of those individuals. So our chapter, what it reports is the rationale, the design process, example materials, research outcomes, and links to publicly accessible resources that came out of both of these projects. Some key features of both projects. Both of them used principal design processes. The NGSA project used ECD, and the SIPS project used a combination of understanding by design and evidence-centered design. In fact, it is the one example I know of where these 2 design logics were actually butted up against each other and figured out how to make them work together. They both generated multiple sets of assessment materials for classroom use. They were teacher validated teacher-friendly, teacher-usable. For the NGSA project, we developed technology-enabled formative tasks and scoring rubrics. And we did this for middle and elementary grade tasks that are aligned to the next generation science standards. And in SIPS, we developed instructional units that had both formative and end of unit assessments and scoring rubrics. And here the project worked at grades 5 and 8 and developed 4 units per grade with multiple tasks of both types. And as I said, we made all the materials publicly accessible via the web. The chapter goes into all of the nuts and bolts of the design process, the logic. And I have to say, doing this work is extremely challenging work, particularly when you're dealing with standards which are supposed to imply multidimensional forms of knowledge and knowledge integration. And then how do you design tasks that are going to elicit that? And then how do you score it? How do you interpret it? So I'll just say a little bit more about essentially these resources. The next generation science assessment resources are available on a website, a portal that is accessible to anyone. Teachers can access the portal. They can sign up their classes. This is all free. They can arrange all ways to use the tasks formatively in their classroom. This is an old graph, but essentially, this is some indication of the extent to which it's been out there in the field and used by educators on some regular basis. The only dilemma we have is essentially people wanted us to develop more, but the funding ran out, and we couldn't convince NSF to complete the whole thing. We also wrote a volume explicitly for teachers to help them be able to do this work on their own, and it was published by the National Science Teachers Association Press. So there's a wealth of resources out there to support educators in engaging in high quality formative assessment in the process of students learning science. For SIPS, what we developed is illustrated here. We developed an integrated set of resources that involve curricular related resources, instructional related ones, and essentially assessment ones. And they are all tied, then they come from the process of doing evidence-centered design along with, understanding by design or backwards. Again, these are all available. This is just an example for one unit at grade 8 of the kinds of resources that are readily available to educators out there in the field. These have been used by teachers in multiple states that were part of the SIPS project and continue to be used by educators in Nebraska and elsewhere. And one of the important things is to think about what is the reporting structure? What is the interpretation? So one of the things that a follow-on project did called CASHA, it developed a series of reports from the end of use of the end of unit assessments. And this is a table sort of showing what kind of reports, who they were targeted for, and what was their purpose. And of course, all of this work requires additional extensive validation. But the point is, if you're designing these kinds of things for complicated, knowledge acquisition, and you want to have the assessment results be usable, you have to think about, what is the scoring? What is the interpretation? And how can people use that data productively in the service of promoting student learning? So it's a quick run through. There's a ton of stuff out there. I have to say, by the way, I love the 3 examples and presentations that preceded this because I think many of these ideas dovetail. A lot of this work can be supported productively by various uses of AI. And I want to mention that I'm working with folks at the University of Georgia, which have a big IES-funded Genius Center, which is to bring together generative AI in support of bringing coherence to curriculum instruction and assessment in science at the classroom level. So I'll stop there, Eric. I'm sure we're getting close to the end.
We are near the finish line. I'll just make the case for anybody listening today to read your chapter with Howard, but also the volume 1 chapter where you make the case for innovating what and how we measure, but also upgrading the intentionality around issues of validity and comparability. Both chapters very worth your time. So we're at the close of the hour here, and just want to say thank you. We're blessed to have a wonderful volume to share in today's webinar as a result of good work from Eva Baker and Howard Everson, Edmund Gordon, as well as series editors Steve Cerici and Eleanor Armour Thomas, as well as blessed by the amazing authors sharing profound working examples in the volume. Thank you to each of the participants in today's conversation, to Howard and Sunil, Gurley and Jer and Jim for your generous and insightful presentations. And thank you all for spending this hour with us, for being a part of a growing community of educators and researchers and designers committed to reimagining assessment and upgrading how we understand and design for quality at this moment. Particularly for the usefulness and usability of assessment for learners, for educators, for families. We hope today's discussion sparked ideas that you'll carry forward in your own practice, and we hope that you'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.